What's going on, YouTube? Culturedog Sam Hatch back with another video. My follow-up to my Halloween challenge for 2015, the 31 horror films in the 31 Days of October challenge. And we'll see this year if I made it or not, or if I fell down on my duties. We last left off with Audrey Rose, and I figured we'd kick things up a notch and go back to the late 70s when things were not always about reincarnation, and they're just about coming back from the dead and eating people. Dawn of the Dead, but I actually fired up the zombie cut, the Dario Argento cut of the film, because I hadn't really seen that in a long time. I always tend to watch the director's cut, or the extended cut, or the original theatrical cut. So that was fun. This classic Anchor Bay set is, Ultimate Edition. I'm a big fan of this sucker. It's a really good release, and a lot of great extras on there. So I actually watched the Roy Frumke's Document of the Dead documentary, which is, it's a fan curiosity for sure. It gets a little tiresome at times, especially in the narration, and it seems a little unfocused, but the other extras on here are great, and I listened to the commentary track with the cast, just having a blast revisiting the days of making the film. So that led me down a path of much zombieness, and I was super excited to watch that again. One of my favorites. And then we went to Army of Darkness, which, again, if you've seen my review of it, you know my thoughts on it. And yes, there are glitches apparently on disc 1 and disc 3 of this, and there's at least a replacement plan in place for the replacement of disc 1. So contact Scream Factory if you have a copy of this and you're looking forward to getting a fixed copy. So I got a review copy, so I'm just going to be sticking with what I have here already, and I'm totally cool with it because I didn't even notice glitches in the first place. And I'm going to be watching the director's cut pretty much exclusively, or for the most part exclusively, so I'm cool. But so check out my review of that if you haven't already, if you want to see my thoughts on Army of Darkness. So then we moved back towards the George A. Romero neck of the woods, and I don't have the newest or newer reissues of this, but I do have the older Anchor Bay Day of the Dead. And this is another film. I was talking with my wife about how me and my cousin, when we were kids, would watch these films over and over again, like most kids would watch Disney movies, and we'd run around the house singing the Robot Chicken / Dawn of the Dead theme song from the mall. And how this film in particular was pretty intense stuff, and it was cool watching this. I hadn't seen this in a long time, and I just remember the opening of the film, which was also the original trailer, just how much that terrified me when I saw it. I remember from my birthday, must have been, 85 or so, I had my parents take me to see Return of the Living Dead in the theaters, and the trailers for that, before that film, included the trailer for this with the arms coming out of the wall while the girl's looking at the calendar, and I was terrified. Much like I was equally terrified as a kid seeing the trailers for Dawn of the Dead with the elevator doors opening and the zombies all coming out. I remember having to go see my mom at the hospital, and I was completely terrified of getting on the elevator and then having the doors open and just this barrage of zombies. So again, George A. Romero did it to me again in the mid 80s, and I was just like afraid to sit near a wall because I was just sure zombie hands were going to break through. So kudos, George, you got me. But yeah, really interesting flick, and it kind of worked at expanding the mythology of the zombies a little bit more, and some good characters in there. So what do we go from there? Oh, I figured I had to do this film, and I've been trying to watch it in every version I have, and I have actually. So even though I think the last time I watched it was on Laserdisc, this time I wanted to get this version that I picked up at the flea market for like $2, and it is the first Blu-ray incarnation of John Carpenter's Halloween. And actually, I thought this looked great. I also have the the big digibook version with the weird painting of Michael on there. But I thought this thing looked pretty good. I mean, I've watched that other version a couple times before, but this is nice. And then that led to watching the documentary Halloween: A Cut Above the Rest, and watching a ton of Halloween extras on all my different variations. So, because I've got them all going back to that original Anchor Bay lenticular cover double disc that came out back in the day. So yeah, Always a pleasure watching that. One of my favorite films of all time. And there's no time when I'm like, oh, I'm not going to watch that. So sure, it was a no-brainer. So then I ran out to go see Crimson Peak, the new Guillermo del Toro horror film, which is, just amazing, which is this luscious color palette. And really, not since like the kind of classic era of the Italian filmmakers, especially Dario Argento, have you seen this vibrant color? And Guillermo del Toro just does not take no for an answer when it comes to injecting obscenely bright primary colors into scenes that would be otherwise mundane. And it's never, the same trick over and over again. There's some orange and teal early on in the film, but then there's bright yellows, and there's a very like Clive Barker-esque, deeply red infused mining section underneath this castle. And if you haven't seen it, do yourself a treat and go check it out before it disappears from theaters. It's the tale of Mia Wasikowska, who plays a young girl who's a little bit bookish and doesn't realize that Charlie Hunnam's the one she should go for, and then Tom Hiddleston and Jessica Chastain completely disappearing into this role as his sister, Tom Hiddleston's sister. They roll into town in New York back in the day and are looking for some investors to help finance this clay mining opportunity they have back home across the pond. And Mia Wasikowska's character catches the eye of this baronet, and much to the chagrin of just about everybody around, including her father, played by Jim Beaver of Supernatural fame. So that was super cool. And it's just amazing how visually striking Guillermo del Toro's work is, and how he can go from different genres. The colors in Pacific Rim were equally stunning, but sometimes just from like heads-up displays and computer graphics and everything like that. But then now here in a more period piece tale, he still finds a way to make it work. And there's a kind of subtext with moths and butterflies, and Mia Wasikowska's character and her wardrobe reflects the kind of butterfly, and the other characters in the film reflect the black moth, and there's just so much kind of rich thematic material in the film, and it's cool. There's a lot of ghosts and supernatural material, but it's not necessarily what you'll think it'd be. But it's great because Guillermo del Toro doesn't approach ghost films the way a lot of other people do. If you've ever seen The Devil's Backbone with characters that have head wounds with like blood that drips upward, that returns here. There's callbacks to even Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, and Pan's Labyrinth. Like, his fascination with fading royalty is clearly in play here, and these characters, this baronet and his sister, take Mia back to this place where there's this house, this castle that's sinking into its clay foundation, and meanwhile there's a hole in the roof, so it kind of has this feel like it's almost like a Chinese courtyard for like an ancient Chinese house. And so there's always snow and leaves and stuff falling in. It's just glorious filmmaking. It's gorgeous. But I love the story that's shot through it. You don't know how supernatural it's going to get, and even the ghosts that are possibly friendly are terrifying looking. So and it's another one of those great films that starts off with a lot of information and that gives you right off the bat. Even just sonic cues that you realize what they are later on in the film. And there's hints about a book that one character is writing and how that ties into everything. And once it all wraps up in a nice bow at the end, it just kind of enriches the whole story. I loved it, so heartily recommend checking out Crimson Peak. And then came home and immediately watched another film that I have to watch every year. And the last time I watched this was on my Laserdisc too, but we fired up the old Disney Blu-ray of The Nightmare Before Christmas. Again, like Halloween, I can watch this countless times, and I have, and was very cool. And then almost immediately thereafter, I saw the Live from Lincoln Center piece on PBS with Danny Elfman and Tim Burton's music collaboration being performed live, and Danny Elfman doing some singing again, which I thought he was never going to do after almost losing his hearing playing in Oingo Boingo. So that was a complete treat and really, really awesome to watch. So then went back to the theaters, checked out Hotel Transylvania 2, which was fun again. It had a lot of the same kind of weird issues as the first film, like vampires procreating with humans, and it took a while to find its foothold story-wise. There was a lot of here's this scene and here's this scene and this milestone, and then it finally established itself. And yeah, I guess they didn't necessarily need to have all those establishing moments and set pieces. But once it got going, it kind of turns into like a grown-ups film, but with monsters, and all these guys are going on a road trip. Dracula is pretty much kidnapping his grandson and going around with his old buddies and going to their old haunts and everything, and finding that the world isn't quite the way they remembered it back in the day, and trying to deal with the possibility that this child that's now been brought into the world is not a vampire and might be a human. And so there's a lot of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner kind of comedy found within, cheesy stuff. But there are a few new additions to the cast. Keegan-Michael Key takes over from CeeLo as Murray the Mummy, and Mel Brooks actually shows up in a very Mel Brooksian character, and but it's cool. Returning cast for the most part. Robert Smigel returns to write. Adam Sandler helps him out, of course, and Genndy Tartakovsky returns to direct, and Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo fame returns to do the music. So if you enjoyed the first film, you'll definitely enjoy the second one. So then I figured, let's do a double feature and hang out, check out some more kids flicks, and skewed a little bit older, and finally saw Goosebumps, which is awesome, if only for the fact that one character espouses the glories of Laserdisc in one scene. There's a cop that's talking to another cop about how she needs to see The Blob and how he's got it on Laserdisc, and she should come over and watch it sometime. But yeah, it's the first kind of postmodern kids film I've seen, and you've probably heard about the synopses, but Jack Black plays R.L. Stine, the writer of the actual Goosebumps novels that were turned into TV shows, etc., and which this movie is based off of. And it's got a kind of Tim Burton-esque vibe going for it. Danny Elfman does the music, and it's a little bit more comedic than some people were hoping for, but I thought it was a bit of a hoot. And Dylan Minnette, who you may have seen as Jack's son on Lost, is the main character. And again, I just had a lot of kind of fun, naturalistic dialogue. Him and his mother, played by Amy Ryan, moving to a new town in Delaware, and kind of, it turns into a very Burbsian kind of situation. If you like that film, you'll probably dig this. And he meets Jack Black's daughter, and is of course taken with her and wants to make friends, etc. But Jack Black is very protective and secretive, and there's a lot of question as to what's going on at this house next door. Just a lot of lighthearted fun, and obviously monsters are involved. The books that R.L. Stine has been writing, all these manuscripts, can actually bring these creatures to life, and there's a lot of funny moments with R.L. Stine complaining about being compared to Stephen King, even though it borrows an element towards the end of the film almost directly from Stephen King's book Cell. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but yeah, had a lot of good times with it, and yeah, it's very meta, it's very self-aware. But Ryan Lee was also great seeing him in it. He was one of the cast in Super 8, which is one of my favorite films. Very underrated flick. And it was a good time. So then follow that up with Halloween. John Carpenter's Halloween again. I mean, who am I going to say no to if they want to watch Halloween and I've already watched it? So we went over to see some friends and they wanted to watch Halloween. And I'm like, dude, fire it up. So we actually watched the one of the older versions. I think it was the single disc version of the same print that was on the lenticular cover double disc Anchor Bay release. So before the Divimax 25th anniversary or whatever that was that came out. It was cool. So I got to see it twice, and I still love it. One of my favorite films of all time. So we checked that out, and then I fired up one film that was assigned to me from Thomas Lindberg from the band At the Gates and many other bands. I did an interview with them last year, and I was kind of asking other people, that were into horror films that I knew, if they could, recommend or assign one to me. So he had assigned me Lucio Fulci's The House by the Cemetery, and I'd seen it before, but I really wanted to grab it on Blu-ray. And finally, I ran out of time last year to order that, and I likewise ran out of time to order Andrea Ferro from Lacuna Coil assigned to me The House with the Laughing Windows, and that was a biatch to find. I finally found it this year and ordered it months in advance. Still hasn't shown up, so that's going to be on next year's list. But I did grab the Lucio Fulci collection from Blue Underground, which is a really, really sweet 3-disc set repackaging of City of the Living Dead, New York Ripper, and House by the Cemetery, which would normally cost a pretty penny separately, and they'll have some really nice extras. but they're all in a nice little thin Blu-ray case. So I fired up House by the Cemetery. The last time I had seen it actually was here in New England. There was a kind of horror chiller theater type show on public access called Scarewolf, and he was showing a public domain version of House by the Cemetery. Yeah, that thing was in rough shape and was just edited to shreds. So it was cool being able to see it really for the first time in its original presentation. I got to check it out in the Italian dialect at some point, because the English track has the kid of the film, Bob, who a lot of people accuse of being just pretty much a rip off of Danny Torrance from The Shining. Is his pretty shrill. I guess they had an older woman do his dubbed voice, and the actor appears in a cool featurette here, and he's like, don't yell at me for the voiceover. It's not my fault, man. But yeah, it's an interesting flick, and it's part of the whole trilogy of The Beyond and this, and of course City of the Living Dead. But it's a little bit more insular. It all takes place in this one house in I believe it was shot in Concord, Massachusetts, so outskirts of Boston. And it's just a kind of haunted house picture mixed with like a creepy undead doctor kind of story too, and that's been used countless other times in X-Files and Supernatural, etc. So yeah, it's very moody and strange and abstract, and of course these films, whatever doesn't make sense doesn't hamper the film really, as long as it makes some sort of kind of dream logic or some sort of strange sense, like The Beyond does. Love that stuff. That said, I think I like that film the least in the trilogy, and then right immediately thereafter I jumped way back a year or so and checked out City of the Living Dead, and I much prefer the vibe and the juju of City of the Living Dead. And Catriona MacColl shows up in all three films, and in that one, she's a woman who has these visions of a priest hanging himself and this kind of undead plague that may wake up. So yeah, really, really interesting and just dynamic from the get-go. And so I hate to say it, but yeah, House by the Cemetery is my least favorite of the group. I still have to watch New York Ripper. That's going to be next. But yeah, City of the Living Dead was a totally awesome way to go out. And yes, I went out. That was my 22nd film I watched. And yeah, I kind of petered out. All right, here's my excuses. I had a wedding. I had to go to. I had some shows with my band. But I also did. I watched Army of Darkness 5 times probably, and then the documentary. I watched Tales from the Crypt movies, each of those 2 times each, and the documentaries. I watched a lot of feature-length documentaries for The Omen and Halloween, etc. I watched tons of episodes of The X-Files, so it wasn't like I was just necessarily slacking, but it was just, I ran out of time to watch the actual features I wanted to see, which is too bad because I picked up a bunch of stuff like We're Still Here and It Follows and some of the newer releases I wanted to grab, and I didn't get a chance to fire them up. And got plenty of fodder for next year, though. So, but yeah, it was cool. And again, this is one of those challenges. Even if I fail it, I have a great time. So hopefully you guys saw some cool flicks. Tell me what you watched down below, and I'll be back momentarily with a Q&A set of answers for all the questions you gave me. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.